Hey guys and gals, welcome to Miyagi Mornings episode 37, I believe we're up to today. Once again, for those watching the video versus listening to the recap podcast on iTunes or Stitcher or whatever, I am indoors. It's cold. I'm not out. I'm not indoors because I'm afraid of the cold though. It's windy again. It's been crazy. We've had like bipolar weather this last week where it's like low 30s and gusting winds of over 20 miles an hour, and sustained winds in the teens. Um, all morning long, and then you work all morning, and if you're me anyway, you get to the point where it's like you got a couple hours of daylight left, and you throw a big heavy Carhartt jacket on. Somebody asked about my jacket in the last video. It's probably the one you were asking about. A Carhartt is who makes that. And you go outside, and the first thing you do is like, oh my god, and you take it off because it's like in the 60s. It's nuts. Anyway, I want to talk to you about land access today, and I kind of talked about this a bunch over these episodes. But it occurred to me the last time I talked about it, I didn't really get into the part of it I wanted to, which is the difference between access to land and land ownership. And this is, I think, a big sticking place for people. You don't have to own land to have access to lots of land or significant land or more land than you can use. And so there are a variety of ways. I think I have 7 here for you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 ways to gain access to land. I'm going to start out with the one that I actually like the least. Unless you have a really strong bond with partners, and then you still need to have everything that could possibly occur written down in a contract, everybody needs to go home. And this is before you even talk about the land itself. You're going to look for land with a group, right? Everything that can happen must be put in a contract. Every party in the agreement must read the contract, and not like a congressman reads a bill. Like actually read, understand, and discuss each thing. And anything that could be a matter of argument or dispute, have the argument or dispute prior to executing the agreement. So that if it's not going to work, everyone can just say, this isn't going to work. It doesn't work for me. Maybe you have 4 or 5 people, and 1 or 2 are like, this doesn't work for me, and the other ones can go ahead. But everybody has to be clear. And then, so that would be obviously collective land ownership. This is a valid option. Again, I find partnerships to almost always have problems. And I find that when people enter into partnerships that have never been in business and never dealt with partnerships in business, it almost always ends badly. Because you assume things that just are not the case. And even when you have been through them, a lot of times you don't enter them because of what you've learned in the process. But this is valid, and I just thought it would be not responsible to leave it off the list. But it would be my least desirable way to do so, unless you have the right people and the right agreement and the right situation, and then it can and does work. And every single thing I'm going to give you today does work because I've watched people do it. And if somebody can do it and they're a human and you're a human, then you can probably do it too. As crazy as that. I know that sounds insane. That you can do anything that any other person can do within reason, right? Like anybody can learn to play a piano. Anybody can learn to play a guitar, but some people will be better at it than others because of natural talent and ability. But anybody can learn to do it. So anybody can put together an agreement and find the right people and get into collective property ownership is one way to have access to land. The next way, which is far less problematic because if something goes wrong, you just stop using that piece and find another piece, is spin farming. And I'm separating spin farming from land leasing because it's usually done at a much smaller scale and it's done in a different manner. Often the payment is simply a portion of the production. So spin farming, if you just look it up, S-P-I-N, farming, you can find countless examples of people doing this. And this is generally done in suburban and urban areas where many of you say you can't leave. Well, you could be accessing land right where you are. This is where I come to you and I say, hey, I'm a local urban farmer. I've noticed you have a large backyard you're not doing anything with. That little space over there could be 5, 6, 8, whatever it is, rows. Here's what they look like where I've done it before. Here's how I maintain them. Here's an agreement that I have. Would you consider possibly letting me basically grow a garden in your backyard in return for X dollars plus produce or just whatever it is? And like I said, there's so much information on that if you actually want to pursue that or at least consider the pursuit of that, do your own research. It's all there, and there are people who have built entire livelihoods teaching others how to do it, so I'll leave it at that. The next one is leasing. Leasing is a great way to control huge amounts of land, and generally, I find that the best way to lease land in this model is for livestock. Cattle probably being one of the best because a lot of landowners understand cattle. They understand what it means to have cattle on their land. And with portable infrastructure, and I would recommend reading the works of Joel Salatin on this. With portable infrastructure, you can easily pick up your farm and move to another piece of land. One of the most successful ranchers out there is a gentleman named Greg Judy. I really recommend you look up his stuff. He's in Missouri, I believe, and he controls thousands of acres, but he only owns a very small piece of land. He's incredibly successful. He's incredibly profitable. His primary means of revenue is he puts cattle on land and manages their movements. So this is where you have to start thinking like the rich versus the poor. The rich want to control things. Sometimes that means ownership, sometimes it doesn't, but they want control. Poor people always want to own shit. That's why they stay poor. Not everything that you have should be owned. Some things it makes sense and some things it doesn't. It's like a tool. There are things that a screwdriver does well, like turn a screw. There are things that screwdrivers can do sort of okay, like pry something open. And there's things that screwdrivers are shitty for, like hammering a nail. So you use the right tool for the right job. You use ownership versus control mechanisms depending on what you're trying to accomplish. But that's something else you can look into. Next up is leasing with the option to purchase. If you do have the desire to eventually own land, it is often the case that you can lock in the purchase price of a piece of land over a term, like let's say 5 years with an option to buy at the end based on the current market value. That way, if real estate market prices go up, and they usually do, not always, well, then you can execute that buy offer. It will be easier to obtain financing, and generally some portion, though not very much, of your lease goes toward the purchase. That's a lease with an option to buy, with the lease crediting some of the purchase value, lease to purchase option. That's another thing that you can look at. And a lot of times, there are landowners who want to eventually sell land, but it's not a good time for them to sell. They want to lock in that ability, and if nothing else, they'll get that revenue over 3 to 5 years in that lease with an option to purchase. And then if the market takes a shit, and sometimes it does, and the value of that property declines, you're not required to execute the offer at the end, but they're required to accept it if you do. It gives you options out. That's another way that you can acquire land. Next up would be managing a co-op or buyer's club where you don't even manage or run or control the land. You simply see to the distribution of the proceeds from it if we're in an ag space. Because this doesn't always have to be agricultural. But if that's the space you want to be in, I hear people all the time, well, what I'm going to do, man, I'm going to get 40 acres, I'm going to have a market garden, I'm going to have a food forest, I'm going to have all this stuff, and then I'm going to sell direct to the consumer. Why don't you do that now? Why don't you get yourself a little used van, put together a good catalog, contact all the growers in your area, and then start building business for them. How much can you produce, at what frequency, how often, and how much can you scale, and what price do you need so that I can put this stuff into a business offering catalog, and I can go out and acquire customers for both of us. Now you're actually, in a way, exercising control over broad amounts of land in production by becoming the distributor. And that might actually make you some money, and then maybe you can stop bitching about not having money, and then maybe the land that you do want to own, you can go either buy directly or use one of these other options. So that's another option that you have. Next up would be foraging. So maybe what you look for is you find a small, affordable place that you can live, your little urban homestead, but then you strategically locate that next to land that is publicly accessible, and then you learn how to frickin' forage and hunt and fish and gather. It's actually not that hard. When I was a kid, I knew places that are still around, and I guarantee you the stuff's still there, where I could go and load, for instance, I could load the back of a pickup truck almost full with a mushroom at one point in the year called ram's heads. These are also known as matakis. They're extremely expensive. Even back in the 80s, you could walk into any corner bar and say, hey, I've got ram's head mushrooms, and get $10 a pound on a bar top from your buddies if you had these things. And there were so many other things that we used to hunt, fish, and forage. So you can either make that part of a holistic plan where you're also doing things on your property, or it can be your primary means. So now you have access to tremendous amounts of what you would call the commons back in the day, but you're using it from your one little base. That's another option. You live somewhere, you could live there. Next up would be work agreements with portable housing, like tiny houses on wheels or RVs. This is something that's being done probably more now than it's ever been done in history. I know people personally. I've had guests on my show doing this where they build their high. I can't ever say it right, but Ariel at Fee North or Nith or something. It's some Scandinavian name. She's on MeWe. She's awesome. She's on YouTube. She's awesome. And she has this little tiny house that she built. I think she's in Wyoming. And she has an agreement with the landowner. She cuts some wood and she does these other things. And it's not a tremendous amount of work, but in return, she has a place to put her place. She even has some electric. I think she's off grid mostly, but she does have some electric. She's able to use wood for heating her home, which is not much in addition to what she's cutting for the landowner. She has access to be able to hunt and gather. She has access to be able to garden. And that's just one person. There's multiple ways to make those agreements. There's plenty of people with large swaths of land that can't be there that would love someone that they could trust there as security. There might even be places like that that have small dwellings on them that they would let you live in for very little money in return for doing some work. And I'm not even trying, and that's 8 ways. And this is why I say, and this is why some of you get mad when I say quit being a whiny little bitch and saying what you can't do. The worst drug epidemic to come along in the history of mankind, I think, is Icantium. Seriously, some of you guys are addicted to Icantium. There's also hopium and copium, but today we're talking about Icantium. It's so easy for you. Oh, shut the fuck up, easy for me. You weren't there when I was sleeping in the back of my fucking pickup truck when I was in my early 20s to save some of my per diem when I was on the road making $14 fucking an hour for busting my fucking ass traveling all over the fucking country, just to be fucking blunt here at the end. Quit your shit. Quit your bitching. I just gave you 8 ways to overcome this obstacle, and I know exactly what many of you who have been on the Icantium are saying in response to all of them. But is your ass. Quit shoving your head up and get on with living your life. If this is something you want, go make it happen and stop telling me why you can't do it. Because this is where I get pissed off, and this is why I quit consulting years ago. People tell you what their problem is, you give them multiple solutions, and all they do is talk themselves out of them. If that's you, I can't help you. If it's not you, and you've needed a kick in the ass, today maybe I've spurred something, and you know what? There's countless other ways to do this. My goal in giving you this list wasn't so you go do one of them. My goal in giving you this list is to turn this computer on that's up here in your cranium so that you'll figure out what you need to do to get what you want. Take care. I'll be back tomorrow.